He didn't even look up when she walked down that aisle. Zariah Bellrose had been awake for 22 hours straight. She had the acquisition folders, the revised projections, the backup contingency documents, stacked in her bag like armor. She was 3 minutes late to a first-class seat she had reserved and paid for herself. 3 minutes. And when she finally found her row breathless, exhausted, still carrying the weight of a deal worth millions, she found another woman sitting in her window seat, wrapped in her fiancé's coat, his hand resting against her hair like she was something precious. CO Jaewon looked up at Zariah standing in the aisle. He didn't ask if she was okay. He asked why she was late. Then he told her to sit farther back. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to protect yourself, subscribe right now. Hit that like button and drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels, because what Zariah did next changed everything. The alarm had gone off at 4:47 in the morning, and Zariah had already been sitting at her desk for 2 hours before it rang. She silenced it without looking up from the spreadsheet on her second monitor. The Boston acquisition was scheduled to close in 72 hours, and the lead attorney on the seller's side had sent over a last-minute amendment at 2A. That quietly shifted the liability clause, in a way most people wouldn't catch until it was already signed. Zariah caught it at 2:14. She spent the next 90 minutes building a counter-proposal, detailed enough that the attorney would understand immediately that someone on the other side had actually read the document. This was the work, not the glamorous part of her job as strategy director, not the dinners in private rooms, not the handshakes in front of cameras, but the real work. The invisible labor that kept negotiations from collapsing at the seams. She was good at it, better than good. She had been doing it long enough that she sometimes forgot there was supposed to be a version of her life that didn't begin before 5 in the morning. Her phone lit up on the desk beside her coffee mug. A text from Jae-hwan. Train leaves Penn Station at 8:10. Don't be late. She read it twice, not because she needed to. Because for a half second, she was trying to decide how she felt about it. The message had no greeting, no acknowledgement that she'd been awake half the night working documents for his acquisition. Just a departure time and an instruction. She typed back, I know. I booked the tickets. She didn't send it. She deleted it and set the phone face down and went back to the spreadsheet. That was something she did, often swallowed the first response, reached for the diplomatic one. She had been doing it so long it had become reflexive, the way a person learns not to flinch at a sound that used to startle them. It wasn't weakness. She had told herself that so many times it had calcified into something she believed. Zariah Bellrose had grown up in a household where being right wasn't enough, unless you could also prove it without making anyone uncomfortable. Her mother had run a small accounting practice in Baltimore for 30 years and had never once raised her voice to a client, even the ones who were wrong, even the ones who were unkind. You can be right, her mother had told her once, or you can be effective. Pick one. Zariah had spent her entire adult life trying to find a way to be both simultaneously, and it had made her exceptional at her job and occasionally invisible inside her own life. She finished the counter-proposal at 6:53. She forwarded it to legal. She shut the second monitor down, pulled her blazer off the chair back, and walked to the bathroom to wash her face. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had been productive and had not slept enough, and Zariah looked at her for exactly 3 seconds before she turned the water on cold. She packed her overnight bag in 11 minutes. The acquisition files were already organized in her leather portfolio. She had her phone charger, her backup battery, a change of clothes, the signed copies of the amended liability counterproposal, and a second copy on a USB drive because she did not trust the Wi-Fi in Boston conference rooms. She did not forget anything. She never forgot anything. She called a car at 7:18. Traffic was wrong in a specific way. Manhattan traffic was wrong. On certain Tuesdays, not gridlock. Just enough friction at every intersection to make a straightforward ride feel like something grinding through sand. By the time the car pulled up outside Penn Station, it was 8:03, and Zariah was already walking before the door was fully open, her portfolio over one shoulder, her rolling bag clicking fast against the pavement. She didn't run. She moved the way she moved through everything efficiently, without wasted motion, her mind 3 steps ahead of her body. She found the platform, found the train, found the car number on her ticket, and she stepped aboard at 8:09, 53 seconds before the scheduled departure. She was not late. She was 1 minute early by any reasonable definition. The train had not moved. The doors were open. She was on the train. But she knew, as she made her way down the aisle of the first-class car, that Jay Juan would have arrived 20 minutes ago and had probably already decided she was cutting it close. She found her row, and she stopped. The window seat, her window seat, the one she had reserved under her own name, on a ticket she had purchased with her own card, was occupied. The young woman sitting there was 24 at most. She had the kind of effortless beauty that announces itself without trying, dark hair loose around her shoulders, a softness to her face that Zariah immediately recognized as youth, uncomplicated and unworried. She was turned slightly toward the window, her posture relaxed, and across her shoulders was draped Jay Juan's coat. The black one, the heavy wool one he wore, 2 important things, the one she had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago. Jay Juan was in the aisle seat beside her. His hand was lifted toward the young woman's hair. Not touching, almost touching. The kind of gesture a person makes when they're accustomed to touching and have simply paused mid-motion. He looked up at Zariah. There was a half-second where his expression did something complicated, not guilt, exactly, but a kind of recalibration. The look of a man who has been caught in a specific arrangement he had not thought through fully. Then it settles into something more familiar. The composed authority he wore the way other men wore cologne. "You're late," he said. Zariah looked at him. She had been awake for 22 hours. She had a portfolio full of documents that had kept his acquisition from falling apart at 2 in the morning. She was standing in the aisle of a first-class train car, looking at her own reserved seat, occupied by a woman wearing his coat. "The train hasn't left," she said. Elodie gets nervous in crowds. He said it the way he said most things, like the explanation was sufficient, like the logic should close the conversation. She needed the window. "You don't mind sitting farther back?" It wasn't a question. Zariah looked at the young woman Elodie, apparently, who had turned from the window and was watching her with an expression that was not quite apologetic and not quite indifferent. It was something in between, with an undercurrent of something Zariah didn't want to name yet. "I reserved that seat," Zariah said. Her voice was level. She was keeping it level on purpose. "Zariah." Jay Juan said her name the way he said it, when he thought she was making something smaller than it was into something larger. "Sit farther back. We'll talk in Boston." She stood there for 4 seconds. A sound like green wood splitting. Later she would think about those 4 seconds. She would think about all the other times she had done exactly what those 4 seconds were leading toward the exhale, the adjustment, the quiet strategic withdrawal that she had told herself was maturity and had slowly understood was something else entirely. She would think about all the times she had sat farther back, metaphorically and literally, because it was easier than the alternative. A second sound. She would think about the counter-proposal she had written at 2 in the morning, and the text message she had not sent, and the 3 seconds she had spent looking at herself in the bathroom mirror. She picked up her rolling bag. She turned around. She walked back down the aisle the way she had come. Jay Juan's voice reached her from behind Zariah, sharper now. The version of her name he used when he expected to be heard. She kept walking. She stepped off the train at 8:09 and 40 seconds. The platform was still open. The boarding doors hadn't closed. She walked away from the train with her rolling bag clicking behind her and her portfolio against her shoulder and her heart doing something she was not going to examine in the middle of Penn Station. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She didn't stop walking. The doors of the train closed behind her, with a sound that felt in the moment both final and very small. She stopped when she reached the far end of the platform. She stood there for a moment, with her hand on the handle of her bag. Then she pulled out her phone. Jay Juan had called twice. She let both go to voicemail. She opened her messages and typed, "We're done." She sent it before she could think about it too carefully. Then she stood on the platform and waited for the train to pull out, because she needed to see it actually leave. It did. She watched the last car disappear into the tunnel. Then she went and bought a coffee black, no sugar, because she didn't have the patience for anything else at that moment, and she sat down on a bench and looked at her phone. Jae-won had texted back, "Stop being dramatic. We'll talk in Boston." She put her phone in her pocket. There was a later train to Boston. She knew this because she had been building contingency plans into everything for 5 years, and old habits were hard to break. The next departure was in an hour and 12 minutes. She would be in Boston in time for the pre-meeting. The acquisition would proceed. She sat on that bench and drank her coffee and let herself feel whatever she was feeling without naming it yet. It was not quite sadness. It was something more like recognition, the sensation of understanding, something you had been not understanding on purpose for a very long time. She had met Jae-won at a financial conference in Chicago 5.5 years ago. He had been pointed out to her before she met him. "That's CO Jae-won, shipping New York. Watch that." And she had looked across a room and seen a man who moved like someone who had never once doubted he belonged exactly where he was standing. She had found that quality remarkable at the time. She had not yet understood that it could curdle into something else. He had sought her out. He was not subtle about it. He walked directly to her, introduced himself without the usual professional preamble, and told her that he'd heard she was the person who'd restructured the Delmont Maritime contract 3 months before it was set to expire, and that he wanted to know how she'd done it. She had told him. He had listened in a way that most men at that kind of event did not listen, without waiting for her to finish so he could respond, without nodding too quickly to signal comprehension he didn't have. He had actually listened. They had dinner that night and breakfast the following morning, and by the time she flew back to New York, she had already agreed to consult on a logistics problem. His company was navigating with a port authority in New Jersey. She told herself later that she should have paid more attention to the fact that they had started as professional collaborators before they became anything else. A sound like green wood splitting, that the shape of their relationship had been established in those first weeks, her intelligence and capability at the center, her doing the work that made his operation function better, him being grateful in ways that were genuine but somehow never quite changed the underlying structure. She had noticed over time things she had not wanted to assign too much weight to. The way he introduced her at events, my Zariah or my fiancé, rather than by her name and position. The way his mother, Hyrin, referred to her professional contributions as helping Jae-won's work, rather than acknowledging she had her own work. The way disagreements were resolved not through actual conversation, but through his tough outlasting hers. The negotiations wearing down until she conceded the smaller points to preserve the larger ones, until she couldn't always remember which points had originally mattered to her. She had not been passive. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself. She was not a woman who had been quietly victimized without agency. She had made choices. She had chosen to stay, chosen to adjust, chosen to believe that a relationship required compromise, and that she was simply a person who was good at it. What she had not understood, what she was beginning to understand now, sitting on a platform bench with a black coffee going cold in her hand, was that she had been compromising in one direction exclusively. She had been doing the bending. The relationship had been shaped around his comfort, his authority, his need to feel like the largest presence in any room, and she had fit herself into the remaining space and called it partnership. And this morning, when she had stood in that aisle, looking at her seat and his coat on another woman's shoulders and his calm expectation that she would simply move farther back, she had finally felt the shape of the space she had been occupying. It was very small. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Not Jae-won, one of the Boston legal team, probably calling about the counter-proposal she'd sent at 6:53. She answered it. "Zariah, I got your amendment," the attorney said. "This is good work, really thorough. The other side is going to fight you on subsection 4. "I know," she said. "I have the response already drafted." There was a brief pause. "Are you on the train?" "I missed it," she said. "I'm on the next one." "Okay." He moved on because he was a professional. "Walk me through your thinking on the liability shift." She walked him through it, 12 minutes on the phone, and she didn't miss a detail, didn't stumble, didn't let the exhaustion or the morning or the coffee going cold, touched the clarity of the analysis she'd spent the night building. Because the work was hers in a way that nothing else had felt fully hers for a long time. When she hung up, she looked at the departure board. 51 minutes. She opened her laptop on the bench and went back to the documents. Her phone buzzed continuously for the next 40 minutes. Jae-hwan. Hyrin, which meant he had called his mother, before the train reached New Jersey, which told her something she had already known, but hadn't wanted to say aloud. A text from Elodie's number she didn't recognize. At first, he said, "You'd calm down. I hope you're okay." She stared at that one for a long moment. Then she screenshotted it and saved it to a folder she labeled, without quite knowing why, documentation. It was the instinct of someone who had spent 5 years in rooms where the official story and the actual story were different things, and who had learned to keep records. She boarded the second train with 8 minutes to spare. She found her reserved seat. She had rebooked on the same service, different car, and she sat down and opened her portfolio and looked at the counter-proposal she'd written in the dark while the city was still sleeping. The train pulled out of the station. Zariah looked out the window as Manhattan slid backward. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry and too angry to cry, and underneath both of those things was something she was not ready to call relief, because it felt too much like admitting how long she had needed to leave. She thought about Elodie. She thought about his hand almost touching her hair. She thought about the coat. She thought about a text message he'd sent her 3 weeks ago. "You work too much. It's becoming a problem." And she had written back, "The Boston deal won't close itself." And he had written back, "That's what assistants are for." She had thought he meant professional staff. She had not considered another interpretation. She thought about how long she had been not considering interpretations that were inconvenient. The train moved north and east through the gray morning. Zariah pulled the acquisition documents out of her portfolio and began to read. She had a deal to close. That had not changed. Everything else had. The Boston Marriott smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air, the way all conference hotels smelled, and Zariah had checked in, changed her blazer, and was already on her second call with the legal team before her rolling bag had finished settling against the closet wall. She had not eaten since the coffee on the platform. She knew this the way she knew most physical facts about herself during high-pressure work, as information, not as something requiring immediate action. The counterproposal had landed well. The seller's attorney had pushed back on subsection 4 exactly the way she'd predicted, and Zariah had walked him through her reasoning in the kind of measured, specific language that left very little room for theatrics. By the time she ended the call, it was nearly noon, and she had 40 minutes before the pre-meeting briefing was scheduled to begin in the hotel's third-floor conference room. She washed her face. She looked at her phone. 11 missed calls. 4 from Jae-hwan, 3 from Hyrin, 2 from a number she didn't recognize that she suspected was Elodie's again, 1 from a senior associate at the CO corporate office in New York, and 1 from her own assistant, Marcus, who had sent a follow-up text that read simply, "Call me when you can. Things are a little weird here today." She called Marcus first. "Okay," he said, picking up on the first ring, "so." Elodie Marr has been CC'd on the Boston acquisition email chain. Zariah went very still. "Since when?" "Since this morning." "The thread with the seller's counsel." Jae-hwan added her before the train left. "She's a 24-year-old intern. She has an CO corporate email address as of 8 today, executive intern, strategy division." A pause. "Your division." Zariah sat down on the edge of the hotel bed. She was very careful not to let any of what she was feeling enter her voice. Who approved that email address? It came from the top Zariah. It came from his office directly. She thanked Marcus and ended the call. She sat on the edge of the bed for exactly 90 seconds, which was all she allowed herself. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up the acquisition email chain and read backward from the beginning. Elodie had not yet replied to anything. She was simply there, a new address appended to a thread she had no professional context for, a thread containing sensitive financial projections and legal correspondence, a thread Zariah had spent 3 months building document by document. She was there the way a flag gets planted, not to participate yet, just to mark territory. Zariah forwarded the chain to her personal encrypted drive. Then she pulled up her access log for the acquisition folder on the shared corporate server and wrote down what she found in a notebook she pulled from her portfolio. She had a habit of writing things in notebooks when they mattered, something her mother had taught her. The idea that handwriting slowed you down enough to notice what you were actually thinking. What she noticed was that someone had accessed the acquisition folder at 5:47 that morning, 45 minutes before her alarm. Someone with credentials she didn't recognize. She wrote down the credential ID and circled it. Then she closed the laptop, straightened her blazer, and went to the pre-meeting briefing. The conference room had the standard layout: long table, water pitchers, a screen at one end showing the acquisition timeline she had built. 6 people were already seated when she arrived. 2 from the CO corporate legal team, 1 outside financial advisor, the lead attorney from her earlier call, a sound like green wood splitting, and 2 representatives from the seller's side who acknowledged her with the brief professional nod of people who had read her counter-proposal and understood they were dealing with someone who did the actual work. Jae-hwan arrived 4 minutes after she did, with Elodie 2 steps behind him. He sat at the head of the table, as though he had been there the whole time. Elodie took the chair to his right, the chair that in every previous negotiation had been Zariah's. Nobody said anything directly about the seating arrangement. That was how these things worked. The displacement happened in silence, registered and noted and filed away by every person in the room, none of whom would bring it up during the meeting. Zariah sat 3 chairs down and opened her portfolio. Jae-hwan met her eyes once. His expression was the composed one, the executive one, the one that gave nothing away to anyone who didn't know him well. Zariah knew him well enough to see the thin layer of discomfort beneath it, the calculation running underneath. She's here. She came anyway, she's still going to do the work. He had counted on that. She could see it plainly. She looked down at her documents. The briefing ran 40 minutes. Zariah presented the revised liability structure, the counter-proposal points, the financial exposure analysis, and the 3 contingency scenarios she had mapped out if the seller pushed back on timeline. She presented all of it without looking at Jae-hwan more than twice. The people who needed to understand the material understood it. The meeting moved efficiently. Then Jae-hwan said, "Elodie will present the market positioning overview." The room recalibrated almost imperceptibly, a slight shift in posture from the legal team, a flicker from the seller's representatives. Zariah kept her pen moving. Elodie opened a folder. She was poised, the way someone is poised when they've rehearsed and are concentrating on not showing that they've rehearsed. She began speaking. 3 sentences in, Zariah heard a number that was wrong, not slightly off. Wrong in a way that meant either Elodie hadn't read the source document carefully, or she had read the wrong version, an earlier draft. The one from 6 weeks ago before the market correction had shifted the comparable property values. The number she cited was high by 11%. Zariah wrote the correct number in the margin of her notepad. She waited. Elodie continued. She pulled up a slide Zariah recognized because she had built the template for it and walked through the competitive landscape. She was fluent and confident and approximately 60% accurate, which in a negotiation of this size was the equivalent of navigating with a map that had several roads missing. Then she cited an internal comment. It was a comment Zariah had written in the document sidebar 3 weeks ago, a note to herself. Flagged red. That read, "Seller may be over-leveraged in Q4, verify before citing publicly." It was a private working note. It was not supposed to exist in any document the other side could see, hear, or have described to them. The seller's lead representative sat forward. "I'm sorry," he said, in the tone of a man who is not sorry at all. "Did you just reference an internal assessment of our financial position?" The room went quiet in a specific way. Go quiet when something has broken. Elodie faltered. That was from it was part of the analysis." "What analysis?" The seller's representative looked at the CO legal team. "Are you telling me you've been circulating assessments of our Q4 leverage in your internal documents?" "That comment was marked private," Zariah said. Her voice was even. It was a working note in a restricted document. It should not have been in any material presented today. She looked at Elodie directly. Which version of the positioning document are you working from? Elodie's composure had cracked around the edges. The one that was shared with me this morning. Which file name? A pause. Market Positioning Final V2. That was not the final version. That was the version from the 5th of the previous month. The one Zariah had deliberately archived after she discovered the sidebar notes were still visible in the exported PDF. The current version was labeled Final V4, dated 3 days ago, with all internal comments stripped. Zariah looked at the seller's representative. The comment she referenced represents an exploratory internal question that was never verified or concluded. It does not reflect our formal position or any document shared with your team. He looked at her for a long moment. Ms. Bellrose, he said, and the fact that he used her name and not the company name was telling. I'd like to take a 20-minute break. Of course, she said. The room emptied with varying degrees of speed. The seller's team left fastest. The SEO legal team left in the practiced, unhurried way of people managing their own alarm. Elodie left without looking at anyone. Jaewon stayed. When the door closed, he said, "Fix it." Zariah looked at him across the table. She had her portfolio in front of her and her pen in her hand, and she was choosing her words the way she chose everything deliberately. She presented from the wrong document, Zariah said. A document she should not have had access to. That file was in a restricted folder. She's on the acquisition team. She is an executive intern. She does not have acquisition-level clearance. Who gave her access to the V2 archive? Jaewon's jaw tightened. I gave her access to the project files so she could learn the process. The process. Zariah set her pen down very carefully. She just read a private assessment, aloud, in front of the seller's lead representative. That is not a learning moment, Jaewon. That is a material breach of negotiation protocol that has potentially cost us the trust we spent 3 months building. I said, fix it. She looked at him for 4 seconds. The same 4 seconds she'd had on the train, or something structurally identical to them. I'll fix it, she said, but we need to talk about the file access. After Boston now. His expression shifted. Not much. Enough. Zariah. She accessed the restricted acquisition folder this morning at 5:47 a. Zariah said, before I was even awake. The credential log shows a user ID I don't recognize. Either she has credentials she was given without my knowledge, or she used yours. The silence that followed, that sentence, was a specific kind of silence. Not the silence of someone who didn't know what she was talking about. The silence of someone deciding how to respond to someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. We'll discuss it after Boston, he said. She picked her pen back up. I'm going to speak to the sellers team now. She spent 19 minutes with them in a smaller meeting room down the hall. She was precise, honest, in the way that was strategically honest. She did not throw Elodie directly under the vehicle. She characterized the incident as a document version control error that had surfaced a private working note. She expressed clear and unambiguous confidence in the SEO team's professional standards going forward, and she did it all in a tone that communicated, I know what I'm doing, and you know I know what I'm doing, and that is why this deal is still worth your time. By the end of those 19 minutes, the seller's lead representative had not forgiven the error, but he had moved from the position of considering withdrawal to the position of cautious continuation. It was enough. She walked back to the conference room. Jaewon looked at her when she entered. There was something in his face, not gratitude exactly, but the recognition of competence, the way someone recognizes it when they depend on it. The look of a man who has just watched someone clean up a mess that he would not have been able to clean up himself, and who finds this simultaneously relieving and uncomfortable. Elodie was not there. They're continuing, Zariah said. Good, he said. She sat down and opened her portfolio and did not say anything else to him for the remainder of the afternoon session. The formal negotiation ran until 6:15. Zariah presented. She fielded questions. She navigated a last-minute push from the seller's attorney on a milestone payment timeline, with the specific kind of calm that comes from having already gamed out the scenario 24 hours earlier. When the session concluded with a preliminary agreement to move to final documentation, the seller's representative shook her hand first. She was walking toward the elevator when Jae-won caught up with her. Zariah. She pressed the elevator button. You're being unreasonable, he said it, the way he always said that particular sentence, not as an accusation, as a statement of fact, the way a person says the water is cold. This morning was nothing. Elodie needed the seat. You're making it into something. Is that what I'm doing? I know you're tired. I know the documents took all night. But you walked off a train and sent me a text like, he stopped. Collected himself. We've been together 5 years. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. He followed. I want to have a real conversation, he said. Not this. She looked at him. He was 40 years old, and he was handsome, and he was one of the most feared men in 3 cities, and right now he was looking at her with an expression. She recognized the version of him that wanted things to be simple, that wanted her to smooth the surface back down so they could all continue in the established pattern. You put her in my seat on a train, Zariah said. Then you added her to my email chain. Then you gave her access to my restricted documents without telling me. And when she damaged the negotiation with those documents, you told me to fix it. She watched his face. I want to know which part of that is me being unreasonable. It wasn't your restricted documents. It was the company's. I built those documents. The elevator reached her floor. She stepped out. The conversation we need to have, she said before the doors closed, is not about the train. She went to her room and ordered room service she barely tasted and spent the evening auditing the acquisition email chain, the file access logs, and every document Elodie Marr had been given access to since she had joined the SEO corporate team 6 weeks ago. What she found over the following 2 hours was not what she had expected to find. It was worse. It wasn't just the acquisition files. Elodie had access to Zariah's client relationship database, not the shared version, the individual one, the one containing her personal notes on 18 long-term clients she had cultivated over 4 years. She had access to the financial projections folder for the second phase of the Boston deal, which hadn't been discussed with anyone externally yet. She had access to a strategic planning document Zariah had been building privately for a potential independent venture, something she had been developing quietly, something she had not shared with Jae-won because it was hers, something she had stored on the corporate temporarily, while she worked on it from the office. Every door, every folder, every file she had ever built inside that system. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled out her notebook and began writing a list of every document Elodie had accessed, with timestamps. She wrote for 45 minutes without stopping. Someone knocked on her hotel room door. She looked at the time. It was 9:43 p.m. She opened the door. Elodie stood in the hallway. She was not in the polished presentation mode from the conference room. She was wearing a sweatshirt and her hair was down, and she looked 24 in a way that was hard to argue with young and slightly off balance and working very hard to appear like someone who was not nervous. I wanted to apologize, Elodie said, for today, the document thing. I didn't know. You don't need to do this, Zariah said. I know you're upset with me. About the train, too. Elodie's voice had a carefully calibrated quality, the way it had in the conference room, like someone running a script that allowed for natural-seeming improvisation. I just want you to know that I'm not trying to take your place or anything like that. Zariah looked at her. What are you trying to do? I'm trying to learn. He said you'd be stepping back after the wedding, taking a less active role. He said you wanted that. The words landed somewhere specific and stayed there. He said I wanted that. Elodie had the grace to look slightly uncertain. He said you're going to focus on, I don't know, the personal side. That you wanted to start a family and pull back from the executive work. He said that's why he wanted me to learn the strategic framework, so there'd be someone ready. Zariah's hand was on the doorframe. She was aware of it in the way you become aware of a single physical point when everything else is very loud. When did he tell you that? She asked. When he offered me the position. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, before the engagement dinner his mother had thrown. Before the deposit on the venue she had paid for herself. Before the revised wedding timeline she had agreed to because he'd said he wanted to move faster, and she had folded because she always found a way to fold. She looked at Elodie. Do you have that conversation in writing? Elodie blinked. It was he told me in person, in his office. Did he follow up in any emails, text messages, anything in the offer documentation? I don't know. Maybe his assistant. Thank you for coming, Zariah said, and she meant it with a flatness that wasn't rude, just definitive. She stepped back and closed the door. She stood in the middle of her hotel room for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called Marcus. I need you to pull everything, she said when he answered. Every financial authorization I've co-signed, every investment account where my name appears, every property document, every shared account. Going back 5 years. Send it to my personal email. Zariah, his voice was careful. That's a lot of documents. I know what it is, she said. How fast can you have it? A pause. By morning. Okay, she said. And Marcus. She hesitated for 1 second, which was as long as she ever hesitated. Don't route he through the corporate server. She hung up. She sat down at the desk and opened her laptop. 6 weeks ago, Seo Jae-won had hired a 24-year-old intern and told her she was being prepared to take over Zariah's role because Zariah would be stepping back after marriage. He had said Zariah wanted that. Zariah had never said anything of the kind. She had never thought it. She had never implied it. She had never, in 5 years of conversations about the future, indicated in any way that she intended to reduce her professional life after marriage. She had done the opposite. She had talked about expanding it, about the independent partnership structure she was exploring, about the Boston deal as a launching point for something larger. He had told a 24-year-old woman that Zariah was going to step aside. And then he had begun giving that woman access to everything Zariah had built. She stared at the laptop screen. Outside, Boston moved through its ordinary Tuesday night indifferent. She understood now that this was not about a train seat. It had never been about a train seat. The train seat was just the first moment she had been tired enough and clear-eyed enough to see what the shape of the whole thing actually was. He had not been grooming Elodie to support Zariah. He had been grooming Elodie to replace her, and he had been planning it for at least 6 weeks, without saying a single word. Zariah opened a new document on her laptop and began to type. She listed every financial contribution she had made to their shared life over 5 years, every investment, every loan, every deposit, every property payment, every business contribution she could remember, and she wrote next to each one, in a separate column, whether she had documentation. The list was long. The documentation column was fuller than she expected. She had always kept records. It was the instinct of someone who had grown up watching her mother run a practice where the paper trail was the only thing that stood between a client and a problem. She had not kept records because she had anticipated needing them. She had kept records because it was how she operated. She worked until 2 in the morning. When she worked until closed the laptop, she sat in the quiet of the hotel room and looked at the window, where the Boston night skyline made its unremarkable pattern against the dark. She thought about something her mother had said once, when Zariah was 22 and had been passed over for a promotion she had clearly earned and had cried about it in the kitchen, and had asked whether being excellent was ever actually enough. Being excellent, her mother had said, is always enough. The question is whether the people around you are honest enough to let it count. Zariah had carried that sentence for 11 years. She was beginning to understand that she had been applying it in the wrong direction. She had spent 5 years being excellent in service of someone who had apparently begun planning her replacement 6 weeks ago. Not because she was failing, not because she had done anything wrong, but because her excellence had become inconvenient to his sense of his own power. She didn't sleep much that night. But before she turned off the light, she did one more thing. She logged into the wedding vendor portal, the one she had set up under her own name, with her own payment credentials, and she began the process of canceling the venue deposit, the catering contract, the floral agreement, and the photography booking. Every single one was in her name. Every single one had a cancellation provision. She submitted the cancellation requests at 2:17 in the morning. Then she turned off the light and lay in the dark and listened to Boston being quiet outside and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the particular kind of clarity that arrives only after you have finally stopped pretending you don't already know the truth. Marcus sent the files at 6:41 in the morning. Zariah was already awake. She had been awake since 5, sitting at the desk with the hotel coffee maker, running its slow, inadequate cycle, staring at the cancellation confirmations that had come through overnight from 4 different vendors. The venue had already processed it. The catering company had sent an auto-reply confirming receipt. The florist had sent a personal email asking if everything was all right, because the florist was a woman named Doreen who had met Zariah twice and apparently had good instincts. Zariah did not reply to Doreen. She opened Marcus's email. He had organized the files into folders: property documents, investment accounts, shared financial authorizations, business contribution records, loan documentation. He had included a note at the top. I went back 5 years. Some of this surprised me. Call me when you've read it. She read it for 2 hours without stopping. The coffee went cold. The Boston morning came up gray outside the window. She did not look at it. What the document showed was not what she had expected, and she had expected something significant. She had known, going in, that she had contributed substantially to their shared financial life. She had known about the residence, about the wedding deposits, about the loans to Hirin. She had known in the general way a person knows things they have chosen not to add up because the total feels like an indictment of their own judgment. But seeing it totaled, line by line, in Marcus's careful spreadsheet, that was different. The Manhattan residence. She had contributed 63% of the down payment from a personal investment account she had built before she met Jae-hwan. She had believed at the time that this was a practical arrangement. She had liquid capital. He had incoming revenue from a new shipping contract. They had agreed to equalize over time. The equalization had never happened. The property was titled in both their names, but 63% of the down payment had come from her account, and she had a wire transfer record to prove it. Hirin's loans. 4 separate transfers over 3 years, each framed at the time, as temporary. Hirin had a cash flow problem with one of her personal investments. Hirin needed to cover a gap while a property sold. Hirin had a tax situation her accountant was sorting out. Each loan had been Zariah's idea, in the sense that Jae-hwan had presented the problems and she offered the solution, and she offered solutions to most problems, because it was faster than watching someone struggle. The total was $47,000. None of it had been repaid. None of it had been asked back, because asking felt transactional, and she had not wanted to be the woman who kept score in a family. She had been keeping score the whole time. She just hadn't been looking at the scoreboard. The business contributions were the part that took her longest to read. 3 of Jae-hwan's legitimate companies, a logistic consultancy, a commercial real estate holding company, and a maritime data firm, had survived critical periods because of work she had done. Not financial contributions this time, but strategic work. She had renegotiated the logistics consultancy's anchor contract when it was 90 days from default. She had restructured the real estate holding company's debt position when interest rates had shifted against them. She had built the maritime data firm's client pitch framework from scratch when the original model wasn't landing. All of this was in the records because Zariah had sent emails, built documents, communicated with attorneys and financial advisors in writing, the way she did everything. The paper trail was thorough and unambiguous. Her name appeared nowhere in the public credit for any of it. The logistics consultancy's turnaround had been attributed to Jae-hwan's leadership in a trade publication profile. The real estate restructuring had been described in internal communications she found in the shared drive as the result of Jae-hwan bringing in outside advisors. The maritime data firm's pitch framework was listed in Elodie's newly created personnel file as a document she had contributed to. Zariah read that last line twice. Elodie had been given credit in an internal personnel document for contributing to a strategic framework Zariah had built 8 months before Elodie had joined the company. She sat with that for a very long time. Then she called Marcus. You saw the maritime data file, she said when he picked up. Yeah, he said. He sounded like someone who had not slept much either. I saw it. When was Elodie's personnel file created? 6 weeks ago. Same day as the email address. And when was the pitch framework document added to her file? 2 weeks ago. A pause. Someone went into the original document and added her name to the contributor field. The metadata shows the edit was made from Jaehwan's login. Zariah closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Send me the metadata report. Already attached. Second folder, she found it. She looked at the timestamp on the edit. It had been made on a Sunday morning at 8:43 a.m. She remembered that Sunday. She had been at brunch with Jaehwan and his mother at a restaurant in the West Village. Jaehwan had stepped away from the table twice to take calls, which she had not thought about at the time because he always took calls. Marcus, she said, yeah, I need you to check every document in the acquisition folder. Everyone that has a contributor or author field. I need to know if any of them have been modified to add Elodie's name. A silence that was slightly too long. Zariah, that's 40-some documents. I know what it is, she said. How fast? Give me an hour. You have 40 minutes, she said. I have a 9 o'clock session. She hung up and went to shower and change, moving on autopilot, her mind running the numbers she had been reading, the way a machine runs a process continuously, without pause, because stopping felt dangerous. She was dressed and at her desk with 12 minutes to spare when Marcus called back. 7 documents, he said. 7 acquisition documents have had Elodie's name added to the contributor field within the last 2 weeks. All 7 edits made from the same login, all on weekends or late evenings. Zariah wrote the number 7 in her notebook and drew a box around it. What's the total page count of those 7 documents? She asked. Combined? Maybe 230 pages. And when were those documents originally created? The oldest one is 14 months old. The newest is 6 weeks. Before Elodie was hired. All of them, Marcus said. Every single one. She closed the notebook. Thank you. Don't discuss this with anyone, Zariah. He stopped. Start, you okay? I'm going to a negotiation session, she said. I'll call you after. The 9 o'clock session was calmer than the previous afternoon, the way things are sometimes calmer after a small disaster has been contained, a fragile, performative calm, everyone being careful. Zariah presented the revised timeline and the amended milestone payment structure. The seller's team accepted 3 of the 4 modifications she proposed. The 4th was tabled for the afternoon session. Jaehwan was present. He did not speak much. He let her carry the room, the way he usually let her carry rooms, which she had always interpreted as trust, and was now reading as something with different architecture entirely. Elodie sat 2 seats away and took notes and said nothing. After the session broke for lunch, Zariah walked directly to the hotel's business center, closed the door, and used the encrypted connection to access the SEO corporate compliance system. She had compliance access because she was a senior strategy director, and compliance access was part of her role. She had never used it for anything other than routine audits. She used it now to pull the access logs for the restricted acquisition folder, not the summary Marcus had sent her, the raw with full credential data and IP addresses. The 547 access from the morning before was from a credential registered to Elodie Mar. But it had been created using an administrative authorization token. Administrative tokens in the CO corporate system could only be generated by 3 people, the head of IT, the chief compliance officer, and CO Jaehwan himself. She stared at that for a long moment. He had not simply given Elodie access to her files. He had given her the means to access files she shouldn't have been able to reach at all access that would not show up on standard credential audits because administrative tokens generated clean-looking logs. She would not have found it if she hadn't been looking at the raw data. She photographed the screen with her phone. Then she exported the log to her personal encrypted drive. She sat in the business center for 4 minutes after that, not moving, just letting the full shape of it settle. Then she stood up, straightened her blazer, and went to find lunch. She was halfway through a sandwich she wasn't tasting when her phone buzzed. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. Not Elodie's number from before different. The message read, "You don't have the whole picture. If you want it, I can give it to you. I'm not his friend anymore." She looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in, 40 seconds. Someone who was in the room when he made the plan. "Meet me at 4. Coffee shop across the street from the hotel. I'll find you." She set the phone down on the table. Her first instinct was that it was a setup Jae-won testing her, or someone working for him, trying to find out how far she had gone with the document review. Her second instinct was that it didn't matter, because she was already past the point where caution was her primary operating principle. She had already canceled the wedding contracts. She had already pulled 5 years of financial records. She had already photographed compliance logs from a hotel business center. She was not at this point someone who needed to be careful about a coffee shop conversation. She replied, "I'll be there." The afternoon session went well enough. She got 3 of the 4 morning items resolved and moved the timeline forward by 2 weeks, which was better than she had projected. She shook hands. She made notes. She did the work the way she always did the work, which was completely and without visible seams, because falling apart on the outside was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and had long since stopped considering. At 3:55, she walked out of the hotel and across the street. The coffee shop was the kind of place that exists in every city near a conference hotel, generic, slightly too bright, the kind of chairs that are designed to suggest comfort without delivering it. She ordered a tea she didn't want and took a table in the back corner where she could see the door. At 4:03, a man came in. He was mid-30s, Korean-American, dressed in business casual that had been slightly degraded by travel, the collar rumpled, the jacket one wrinkle past professional. She recognized him after a moment. Daniel Cho, a senior business development director at the ETSAO corporate office in New York. She had met him 3 times. He had always been formal, pleasant, present at the edges of meetings without being central to them. He sat down across from her without ordering anything. "I've been with the company 4 years," he said. He had the voice of someone who had rehearsed his opening and was pushing through the nerves of it. "I'm resigning on Friday. I've already signed with another firm. I'm telling you this, so you understand. I have nothing to gain from this conversation." "All right," Zariah said. "He had a meeting 6 weeks ago," Daniel said, in his office. "Me, him, and Kwon. You know Kwon, the chief of staff." "I know who Kwon is." He laid out a plan. Daniel looked at the table, then back at her. For the transition, he called it a transition. The idea was that after the wedding, you would be moved into an advisory role, not fired, not cut out completely, but he stopped. He said you'd be easier to manage once you were married. That the structure of the marriage would give him more leverage. The word leverage sat on the table between them like something with weight. He said that specifically, Zariah said. That word. He said the marriage would normalize the power balance. That's the phrase he used. Normalize the power balance. Daniel's jaw moved. Kwon asked what happened if you didn't agree to step back. Jae-won said you would agree because you always adjusted. He said you'd done it for 5 years and there was no reason to think you'd stop. Zariah set her cup down very carefully. And Elodie, she said. Elodie was part of the plan from before he hired her. She interviewed with him before the posting was even public. He told Kwon she was the right profile, capable enough to learn the strategic framework, not so capable that she's become independent. Daniel's voice had flattened. He described what he was looking for as someone who needs to be needed. He said that specifically. Someone who needs to be needed, not someone who needs to lead. She looked at him. You were in that meeting? Yes. And you didn't say anything at the time. Daniel's face did something complicated. No. Why are you saying it now? Because he gave Elodie credit for the maritime data pitch deck that you built, Daniel said. I was in the room when you presented that framework to the board 18 months ago. I watched you do it. And last week I saw it in her file, and he stopped. I told myself a lot of things about this company for 4 years. That one I couldn't. Zariah looked at him for a long time. Is there anything in writing? She asked. Kwon takes notes on everything. Always has. But you'd need access to his personal files to get them, and those aren't on the corporate server. What about the meeting itself? Was it recorded? Jae-hwan's office has a recording system for formal meetings. But he controls the archive. Daniel paused. There might be a way to request the log through compliance. If you frame it as a governance audit, his office isn't exempt from compliance review, it just never gets reviewed because nobody asks. She wrote nothing down. She did not need to. The information was already organizing itself in her mind, the way information always organized itself, into structure, into sequence, into what could be proven and what couldn't, and what bridged the gap. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry I waited this long," he said. She looked at him. "Did you know about the access logs? The administrative tokens he generated for Elodie?" He blinked. "No, I didn't know about that." "Then you didn't have the whole picture either," she said. Nobody did. She paid for her untouched tea and walked back across the street. In the elevator, she stood very still and watched the floor numbers climb and thought about the word leverage. He had used the word leverage about their marriage. Not about their shared life, not about their future, not about love or partnership or any of the other words that had been said over 5 years of dinners and negotiations and early mornings. He had sat in a room with 2 of his senior staff and described the legal structure of their marriage as a mechanism for normalizing the power balance between them. She had been managing a relationship. He had been managing an asset. She got off the elevator. She walked to her room. She sat down at the desk and opened her laptop and pulled up the corporate compliance portal and spent 40 minutes building a governance audit request broad enough to include Jae-hwan's office recording logs. Without specifying exactly what she was looking for, she filed it through her compliance access credentials. The system generated an automatic confirmation and a 72-hour response window. She had 72 hours. She was in Boston for another day and a half. She thought about calling someone, a friend, her mother, anyone who existed outside the architecture of this situation. And then she didn't, because she wasn't ready to say any of it out loud yet. Saying it out loud meant it was real in the way it had to be real before she could respond to it fully. And she needed to respond to it fully, not partially. There was a knock at her door at 7:15. She looked through the peephole. Jae-hwan. She opened the door but did not step back to let him in. He looked at her. He had changed clothes since the afternoon session, a different shirt, no jacket. He looked for the first time in a very long time, uncertain. Not the managed uncertainty he sometimes performed when he wanted her to soften, but something that looked more involuntary. "The vendor cancellations came through," he said. "I know. Zariah." He said her name like a sentence. "You canceled the venue." "I did, the deposits. Were paid with my card." "My money. So yes, when I cancel them, I get the refund." His expression shifted. "You planned this." "I didn't plan this," she said. "You did, 6 weeks ago, in your office, with Daniel Cho and Kwan in the room." She watched his face. It was the most honest thing she had seen on it in a long time, the sequence of recognition exposure, and then something that might have been the beginning of shame, or might have been the calculation of how much she actually knew and how much was inference. "You talked to Daniel," he said. "I talked to a lot of people. It was not quite true yet, but it would be. And I pulled the compliance logs. The administrative tokens you generated for Elodie's credentials. The document contributor edits made from your login. The maritime data framework in her personnel file. She watched each item land. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to tell me how much of this you're going to try to explain as mentorship?" He said nothing. "You told her I wanted to step back," Zariah said. "After the marriage. You told her I wanted a quieter life. You told her she was being prepared for my role." Her voice was level. She was keeping it level on purpose, the way she kept everything level, but it was costing her more than it usually did. "You sat across from me at dinner 3 weeks ago and told me you were proud of my work. And 6 weeks before that you were in your office, telling your chief of staff that the marriage would give you leverage." "It wasn't," he stopped. "It wasn't what?" she said. "It wasn't that bad? It wasn't what it sounds like? Tell me what it wasn't." "I was protecting the company," he said. It came out flat, rehearsed, the argument he had apparently prepared. "The acquisition required stability. You work without limits. You take on everything. I was trying to build a structure that would—" "Don't," she said, quietly. but with something in it that stopped him. Don't tell me you were protecting me by replacing me without my knowledge. He looked at her. The money, she said. I want an accounting. Everything I contributed. The residence. The loans to your mother. The business work. Every dollar and every hour. Documented and verified. His jaw tightened. We're not doing this in a hotel hallway. No, she said. We're doing it in a law office. I'll have my attorney contact yours by Monday. She looked at him for one more second. You were afraid of me, she said. Not with heat. With the precision of someone's finally located the correct word for something they've been circling for a long time. That's what all of this is. You were afraid of me, so you decided to make me smaller before I got any bigger. And you used a 24-year-old woman to do it. He didn't deny it. She stepped back and closed the door. She stood on the other side of it with her hand flat against the wood and breathed exactly twice. Then she went to the desk and opened her laptop and began writing an email to her attorney. She wrote for an hour. She was thorough. She attached the wire transfer records, the access logs, the metadata report Marcus had sent, the screenshots of the contributor edits, the compliance audit request confirmation, and the notes she had taken in her handwriting across 4 pages of the hotel notepad. She sent it at 8:53. Then she opened a second document and began building something she had not let herself fully imagine, until right now, a financial independence structure, separate from everything associated with Jae-hwan's corporate sulk world, built entirely on the work and capital that was unambiguously hers. She worked on it until midnight. Outside, Boston was finishing its night, its ordinary and uncomplicated night, people driving home and locking doors and doing the 1,000 small things that constitute a life that is going normally. Zariah's life was not going normally, but for the first time in 5 years, it was going in a direction she had chosen. At midnight, she saved the document and closed the laptop and looked at her reflection in the dark hotel window, a woman who had spent 2 days being systematically confirmed in her worst suspicion about the last 5 years of her life, who had responded by pulling documentation, building cases, filing compliance requests, and sending emails to lawyers at 9 o'clock at night. She looked like someone who was not finished. She was not finished. The next morning brought the final Boston session, and Zariah walked into that conference room at 8:58 and closed the deal that she had spent 3 months building, not cleanly, not without friction, because nothing real ever closes cleanly, but completely, with every major point result in the final documentation agreed upon, and the seller's lead representative shaking her hand and saying, with the specific warmth of professional respect, "You're very good at this." She thanked him. She was packing her portfolio when Jae-hwan appeared beside her. He said nothing for a moment. Around them, the room was emptying, people gathering papers and making the small talk of concluded business. "The compliance audit you filed," he said very quietly. "It's going to flag internal communications." "Yes," she said. "It will, Zariah. I know what I filed," she said. "I know what it will find." She zipped her portfolio. "You should talk to your attorney." She picked up her bag and walked out of the conference room and did not look back. And the thing that surprised her, the thing she hadn't expected, was that it did not feel like walking away from something. It felt, for the first time in a very long time, like walking toward it. The train back to New York left Boston at 2:17 in the afternoon, and Zariah had a windows seat she had reserved herself, and nobody was sitting in it. She put her portfolio on the overhead rack and her bag under the seat in front, and she sat down and looked out at the platform as it began to slide backward. And she felt the specific physical exhaustion of someone who has been running on adrenaline and cold coffee and moral clarity for 72 hours and is now, for the first time, sitting still. Her phone had 41 notifications. She turned the screen face down on the tray table and watched Massachusetts move past the window. She had 40 minutes before she needed to be functional again. She took them. She did not sleep. She was too wound to sleep, the kind of wired that sits behind your eyes and hums. But she let herself be quiet, which was different, and she watched the landscape and did not think about anything specific, and let her body remember what it felt like to occupy space without managing it. Her phone buzzed continuously against the tray table. At the 40-minute mark, she turned it over. 11 texts from Jae Hwan. 3 from Hai Rin. 2 from Kwon, which meant Jae Hwan had told his chief of staff to reach out directly, which was a specific kind of escalation. 1 from Daniel Cho saying simply, "He knows we talked. Watch yourself." 1 from Marcus. Compliance office called me. They want to know who authorized the governance audit request. I told them it came from you directly. They said they'd follow up. Zariah, this is getting big. And 1 from a number she had never seen before, with a New York area code that read, "Miss Bellrose. My name is Reeves. I'm an investigator with the CO Corporate Compliance Division. I'd like to schedule a call at your earliest convenience. This is time sensitive." She read that last one 3 times. The Compliance Division had an investigator. She had not known that. She had assumed compliance was handled by the internal audit team, which was slow and bureaucratic and responsive primarily to Jae Hwan's priorities. An investigator with a direct number who reached out personally within hours of a governance audit request meant one of 2 things. Either the Compliance Division was more independent than she had understood, a sound like green wood splitting, or someone inside the company had been waiting for exactly the kind of request she had filed because they had already been building something. She called the number. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was mid-40s, unhurried, the voice of someone who had conducted a great many difficult conversations and had stopped being nervous about them some time ago. "Ms. Bellrose," he said, "thank you for calling back quickly." "You said time sensitive," she said. "I did." A brief pause, the kind that means something is being decided. "I want to be direct with you. Your governance audit request this morning was not the first inquiry we've received touching on the documents and credentials in question. We've had an open internal review for approximately 3 weeks. Zariah's hand tightened slightly on the phone. 3 weeks. Initiated by our chief compliance officer after a routine server audit flagged anomalous credential activity in the restricted acquisition folder. The administrative token usage you identified this morning was already in our review file. Another pause. You've been doing your own documentation. Yes. The metadata reports on the contributor field edits. The wire transfer records, the access logs. He was not asking. I'd like to see what you have. Why? Because what you have from the outside is different from what we have from the inside, he said. And the picture they make together is considerably clearer than either one alone. She looked out the window. Connecticut had started the landscape changing, the trees closer together. "What are you investigating exactly?" she asked. "Unauthorized credential generation. Unauthorized document modification. Potential misrepresentation in personnel records, a beat. And a pattern of strategic asset appropriation that our CCO believes may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty at the executive level." Strategic asset appropriation. It was a clinical phrase for what she had been staring at across 4 pages of handwritten notes in a Boston hotel room. "If I share my documentation," she said, "what happens to it?" "It becomes part of a formal compliance record. That record is generated independently of executive oversight. It goes to the board's audit committee, not to the CEO's office. Jae Hwan is not the CEO of the legitimate corporation," she said. "No," Reeves said, "but he has historically exercised significant influence over who the CEO listens to. The audit committee is a different story. They answer to the shareholders." She thought about that for 4 seconds. "I'll send you what I have," she said. "Tonight. I appreciate that." He paused one more time. "Ms. Bellrose, the review we've been conducting, it's going to move faster now. I want you to be prepared for that." "How fast?" "Days," he said. "Not weeks." She ended the call. The train moved south through the gray afternoon. She opened her laptop and began organizing the documentation, not the raw files Marcus had sent, but a structured package sequenced to tell a story in the order an investigator would need to read it. She had been building toward this without knowing she was building toward it, the way you sometimes only understand the shape of what you've been doing after you've been doing it long enough. She worked for the rest of the ride. She was in Penn Station by 6:40. Manhattan hit her the way it always hit her. After time away, hard and immediate, the noise and the press of it, the specific texture of a city that does not notice you have been gone. She got a car and sat in the back and watched the streets go by and sent the documentation package to Reeves at 7:03. His reply came at 7:21 received. We'll be in touch by morning. She was still reading the reply when the car pulled up outside her building. She looked up at the building's facade for a moment. The Manhattan residence, 63% of the down payment. Her name on the title, her money underneath the architecture. She went inside. The apartment was empty. She had not expected otherwise. Jae-hwan kept a separate property in the city for when he needed to disappear from the legitimate world into the other one, and she had always understood this without having it explained to her. She set her bag down in the entry and stood for a moment in the quiet. The apartment looked the same. That was the disorienting part. The furniture she had chosen, the prints on the walls she had framed, the kitchen counter, where she stood every morning, all of it identical to what it had been 4 days ago, and none of it quite the same. She poured water and didn't drink it, and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the city. Her phone rang. Hi, Rin. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered, because she had learned a long time ago that postponing a difficult conversation with CO Hyrin did not make the conversation easier. You canceled the wedding, Hyrin said. No greeting. Her English was precise and accented and completely without warmth at this particular moment. Yes, Zariah said. You will call the vendors and you will uncancel it. I won't. A silence that had temperature to it. You are making a decision you don't understand the consequences of. Zariah looked at the city. I understand them completely. Your son authorized false credential access to my restricted corporate files, Zariah said. He added a 24-year-old intern's name to documents I created. He told his chief of staff that the structure of our marriage would give him leverage over me. She paused. Which of those would you like to discuss first? Another silence. Longer. You have been like a daughter to me, Hyrin said finally. The register of her voice had changed, not softer, exactly, but recalibrated. The approach shifted the way a negotiation shifts when the first position fails. This family has given you $47,000, Zariah said, that I am going to need returned. I have the transfer records. The silence this time was absolute. Excuse me, Hyrin said. Very quietly. The loans, Zariah said. 4 transfers over 3 years. I have wire records for each one. I would like the money returned, and I'd prefer to handle it without involving attorneys, but I'm not particular about which way it goes. The call ended. Not in anger, Hyrin was too controlled for that. It ended with a click that was precise and deliberate, the conversational equivalent of a door being shut by someone who intends to open it again on their own terms. Zariah set the phone down and finally drank the water. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she expected. She was awake at 5:30, and by 6 she had coffee and was at the desk when her email showed a message from Reeves at 5:47 a. Ms. Bellrose, the audit committee has been briefed. Formal review is initiated. Please be available today. She replied, I'm available. She was on her 3rd cup of coffee when Jae-won's key turned in the apartment door at 8:14. She heard him before she saw him, the specific sound of his entry, keys, the door, the brief pause he made just inside the threshold that she had always read as someone settling into a space and now read as someone taking inventory. He came into the kitchen. He looked at her across the counter. He had not slept much either. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the slight darkness under his eyes. He was dressed well, regardless, because he was always dressed well, because appearance was structural to how he moved through the world. The compliance review, he said. Good morning, she said. Don't. He pulled out a stool and sat down. The compliance review you initiated. It's gone to the audit committee. I know, Zariah. He said her name and stopped. Started again. What you're doing, you don't fully understand what this touches. Tell me what it touches. His jaw tightened. The legitimate companies and the other operations, they aren't fully separate. You know that. You've always known that. If a formal compliance review starts pulling at the corporate structure, things come apart that can't be put back together. That's not my problem, she said. I didn't create the structure. You benefited from it. She looked at him. I benefited from work I did. The legitimate companies I helped stabilize, the contracts I renegotiated, the frameworks I built, that was my labor. I didn't benefit from anything else, and you know it. A compliance review doesn't care about intent. Then you should have thought about that before you gave Elodie an administrative token and had her access my files at 5:47 in the morning. His face moved through, something not quite the managed composure, but beneath it, the thing the composure was built to contain. I was managing the transition, he said. It was poorly handled. I know that. But the intent, she said, was to replace me without telling me. The intent was to use our marriage as a mechanism to reduce my authority in the company structure. Those are your words, Jae-hwan. You used the word leverage. Your chief of staff was in the room. He stood up. Daniel Cho is a man who's leaving the company for a competitor. You understand that anything he told you is corroborated by the compliance logs, the metadata reports, and a 72-hour paper trail that I have already sent to a corporate investigator. She kept her voice level, completely level. You can discredit Daniel all you want. You can't discredit a server log. He walked to the window, stood with his back to her for a moment. What do you want? He said. Not loudly. The quieter version of him, the one she had always found more difficult than the loud version because it was the one that was actually thinking. I want the financial accounting, she said. Everything I contributed, returned. The residence, the loans to your mother, the business contributions evaluated and compensated. I want my name removed from every joint account and authorization that isn't the property title. And I want the property bought out at current market value if you intend to keep it, or sold and split according to contribution. He turned. That's a significant number. Yes, she said. It is in the compliance review? That's not mine to call off. I filed the request. It's in the audit committee's hands. Something shifted in his face then. You understand what happens to me if that review goes all the way. I do, she said. The legitimate operations. The board. Everything I've built in the public side of this. I understand, Zariah. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, and she held still, not out of fear, never out of fear with him, but out of the specific steadiness of someone who has already decided and is waiting for the conversation to catch up. He stopped across the counter from her. 5 years. Everything we built here, you're going to burn it down. You built a replacement for me 6 weeks ago, she said. You burned it down. I'm just standing in the ashes with the documentation. His hands gripped the edge of the counter. His knuckles went pale. She watched him and felt, underneath the steadiness, the precise ache of understanding that the man she had loved was also, this had always been this, alongside everything else, and she had been so careful not to add up what she already knew. I can fix this, he said. The money, the documents, Elodie, I can fix all of it. The compliance review can be managed. Give me 60 days. No, Zariah, no. Not loud, but with something final in it that he heard, because his hands released the counter edge. You don't get 60 days. You had 5 years. He stepped back. She picked up her coffee cup and walked around the counter and went to her office, the small room off the hallway she had converted from a second bedroom, lined with filing cabinets and a desk that was hers in every sense, and she closed the door. She sat down. She pulled up her email. Reeves had sent a follow-up. The audit committee is requesting that all parties with knowledge of the credential activity be available for formal interviews beginning tomorrow. This includes you, Ms. Bellrose, as the rights holder of the affected documents. It also includes Elodie Mar and Seo Jae-hwan. I want to prepare you. The interview will be thorough. She replied, confirming her availability. Then she opened a separate email and wrote to her own attorney, "We need to meet today. The compliance review is moving. I have everything. Bring the property valuation contacts." Her attorney replied in 11 minutes, 2 o'clock. My office. She spent the next 3 hours at her desk, building the formal financial claim document, not the notes version, not the hotel notepad version, but the legal document organized by category, sourced to specific records, with calculations verified against market data. It was the most detailed thing she had produced in a month, which was saying something. At 11:40 her phone rang. Unknown number. Manhattan area code. She answered. Ms. Bellrose. A woman's voice, composed, professional, with an undercurrent of something that was almost embarrassment. "My name is Karen Ashby. I'm Elodie Marr's attorney." Zariah set her pen down. "She wants to talk to you," Ashby said. "Not through counsel. Directly." "About what?" A pause. "She has documentation she'd like you to see before the compliance interviews tomorrow. She says you'll want it before you go into that room." Another pause. "She said to tell you that she found the same thing you did, just from the other direction." Zariah thought about the night Elodie had knocked on her hotel room door. The careful posture, the rehearsed apology, the fracture underneath it, when she'd said, "He told me you wanted to step back." Where Zariah said, "She's at a coffee shop in Midtown. She's been there for 2 hours. She didn't know if you'd pick up." Zariah looked at the financial claim document open on her screen. "Send me the address," she said. "She was there in 20 minutes. Elodie looked worse than she had in Boston. Not dramatically, not in a way that was visible from a distance, but up close. She had the compressed, tightly managed appearance of someone who had been doing serious crying and had then done serious reconstruction before leaving the house. Her hands were around a coffee cup she had apparently been holding for a while without drinking. Zariah sat down. Elodie pushed a folder across the table without preamble. "He told me things that weren't true," she said. Her voice was steady in the fragile way that means it has been steadied deliberately. "About you. About what the job was. About what my role was going to be." She nodded at the folder. "Those are the messages. All of them. Everything he sent me." Zariah opened the folder. Private messages. A significant number of them. Screenshots, printed, organized chronologically. She read quickly, the way she read everything, and what she found in those pages confirmed what Daniel Cho had told her, and then went further conversations Jae Hwan had with Elodie about Zariah directly, about her temperament, her ego, her difficulty, conversations in which he had positioned Elodie as the solution to a problem he had framed as Zariah herself, conversations in which he had described his own fiancée as exhausting and combative and too independent for what I actually need. He had called Zariah too aggressive. He had told Elodie that what he needed was someone who could work with him rather than constantly working at the same level. He had said in a message dated 9 weeks ago, before Elodie was even hired, before the position had been created, "I need someone who makes me feel like I'm still the smartest person in the room." Zariah closed the folder. She sat for a moment with the specific texture of reading words that were meant to be private and discovering that they are worse than your worst interpretation. "He didn't tell me what he was actually doing," Elodie said. "I thought he made it sound like you were transitioning out voluntarily. Like the job was genuinely available. I wouldn't have..." She stopped. "I'm not asking you to believe that, necessarily. She pushed a loose strand of hair back with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "I also think I knew something wasn't right, and I didn't look at it too hard because I wanted the opportunity. And that's on me." It was, Zariah thought, the most honest thing anyone involved in this situation had said to her in 4 days. "Are you willing to submit these messages to the compliance review?" Zariah asked. "That's why I called you," Elodie said. "My attorney says they're relevant. But I wanted to ask you first, because they're also..." She hesitated. "They're about you. The things he said about you. I didn't want to just drop them into a formal process without..." "Yes," Zariah said. "Submit them." Elodie nodded. Her eyes were wet in the way eyes are when someone has been holding something for a long time and has just put it down. "He's going to say I fabricated them," Elodie said. "The metadata will show the timestamp and originating account," Zariah said. "He knows that. He won't say fabricated. He'll say context. He'll say they were taken wrong." She paused. "Let him try." She stood up. Elodie looked up at her. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the seat. And for all of it." Zariah looked at her. 24 years old, sitting in a midtown coffee shop with a folder of evidence against the man who had recruited her with false premises and used her as a mechanism for dismantling another woman's professional life. "You weren't the weapon," Zariah said. "You were just the one he handed it to. Those are different things." She picked up her bag. "Get a better attorney than Ashby. You're going to need one." She walked out. The attorney's meeting at 2 o'clock ran 3 hours. By the time she left her attorney's office at 5:15, The financial claim document had been formally filed, the property valuation process had been initiated, and her attorney had a call scheduled with Hyrin's private financial manager for the following morning. She was walking to a car when her phone rang. "Reeves, I wanted you to hear this directly," he said. Elodie Mar's attorney submitted documentation to our review an hour ago. Private communications between Ms. Mar and COJ Juan. "I know," she said. "I spoke with her." A brief pause. "The audit committee has also requested that Juan submit his meeting notes from the last 90 days. He's complying." Another pause. "I've been doing this for 12 years, Ms. Bellrose. The compliance picture here is it's significant." "I know what it is," she said. "The formal interviews begin at 9 a. Tomorrow, Midtown office. I'll send you the address." "I'll be there," she said. She got in the car. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary evening motion, people finishing work, lights coming on in buildings, the traffic thickening and thinning in its patterns. She watched it and felt the exhaustion settling into her now that the adrenaline had somewhere to go, the deep bone-level tiredness of someone who has been at war for 5 days and has just reached the night before the last battle. Her phone lit up with a text from J. Juan, the interview tomorrow. "I need to know where you're standing before we walk into that room." She looked at the message for a long time. She typed back, "On my own side." Same as always. She sent it and put the phone in her pocket and looked out the window. Tomorrow, in a Midtown law office, the compliance review would take formal testimony. Juan's notes would be entered into record. Elodie's messages would be entered into record. The credential logs, the metadata, the wire transfers, the administrative tokens, all of it would become part of a formal accounting of what had actually happened inside the structure of the last 5 years. Jaewon would be in that room. So would she. And this time there was no negotiation to save, no deal to rescue, no room for her to quietly absorb the damage and keep the operation running. This time, the only thing in the room would be the truth, and her documentation of it, and the question of whether the man across the table had ever understood what he actually had in the woman he had spent 5 years trying to make smaller. The car stopped outside her building. She looked up at the facade. She went inside. She laid out her clothes for tomorrow, organized her portfolio for the final time, a sound like green wood splitting, and sat at the kitchen counter with a glass of water and the specific stillness of someone who has done everything that can be done and is now simply waiting for morning to confirm it. Her phone showed one more message from Marcus, sent at 6:44 p.m. People at the office are talking. Everyone knows something is happening. Zariah, whatever you walked into, I think you're the only one who walked in prepared. She smiled at that, not warmly, the other kind. She set the phone face down and went to bed and lay in the dark of the apartment she had paid 63% to live in, and she listened to the city outside and thought about nothing specific, which was its own kind of preparation. Tomorrow she would walk into that room and COJ Juan would finally be in a space where his name meant nothing and only the signatures mattered. She was awake at 4:51, not because of an alarm. Because her body had apparently decided that sleep was a currency she had already spent down to nothing and had no further credit to extend. She lay in the dark of the Manhattan apartment. For 11 minutes, she counted them without meaning to. The way the mind counts things when it has nothing else to grip, and she looked at the ceiling and listened to the city doing its pre-dawn work outside. Then she got up. She ground coffee beans at the counter, the way she did on mornings when she needed something methodical to do, before her mind was fully running. The sound of the grinder was too loud for 4 in the morning, and she didn't care. She ran the pour-over slowly, watching the water go through, and she stood at the kitchen counter in the dark apartment, in the clothes she'd slept in, and she let her still for the 7 minutes it took. By 6, she was dressed. Not her best clothes, not armor, not performance. A clean blazer. Good shoes, the charcoal trousers she wore when she needed to feel like herself without trying. She reviewed her documentation package one final time at 6:15, sitting at the kitchen desk with the coffee going warm beside her. She knew every line of it. She had known every line of it for 3 days. But going through it was the thing her hands needed to do, and she had stopped apologizing to herself for the ways she managed her own steadiness. At 7:30, she made toast and ate it standing at the counter, looking out the window at a Manhattan morning that was arriving gray and cold and entirely indifferent to what this day was. She ate all of it. At 7:42, Jaehwan's key turned in the front door. She did not move from the counter. He came into the kitchen and stopped when he found her there, already dressed, already finished, already past the part of the morning he had apparently planned to arrive before. She watched him register this. He had expected, maybe, to find her in the middle of getting ready, to have the small conversational leverage of a woman who was still assembling herself. He had miscalculated by 2 hours, which was not unusual. He had been miscalculating her for considerably longer than that. He went to the coffee maker without speaking. She had left enough for 1 cup. He poured it. He stood on the opposite side of the kitchen counter, and they looked at each other across it, across the granite surface that was, depending on which set of documents you consulted, either a jointly owned fixture or 63% hers. He looked like a man who had been alone with himself all night and had not found the company pleasant. The suit was immaculate. Of course it was. It was always immaculate, but around his eyes was the compressed, slightly hollow look of someone who had been running numbers in the dark and disliking every result. "I want to talk," he said, "before we go in." "We've been talking," she said. "I mean without the layer on it." He set the cup down. "Without the attorney positioning. Without," he stopped and started again. "You and me before the room." She looked at him. "All right." He was quiet for a moment. A real quiet, not a strategic one. She had spent 5 years learning the difference, and it still surprised her, occasionally, when he allowed it. "I was afraid of you," he said. She did not react. She had already said that sentence to him in a hotel hallway 4 days ago, and it had not been a revelation to her then. But she let him arrive at it his own way because that was the only way it would mean anything, to him or to her. "Not from the beginning," he said. His voice had the quality of something being said for the first time to another person after being carried alone for a long time. "In the beginning, it was the opposite. You were the first person I'd sat across from in years who didn't adjust. When you talked to me, you said the thing you actually thought. Not the version calculated for the room. Not the angle that would land best." He looked at his coffee cup. "I found it remarkable. I wanted to be around it." And then she said, and then it kept going. He looked up. The legitimate companies grew, and everyone in the rooms where it mattered could see that a significant portion of why they grew was you. Your work, your negotiation, your frameworks, the deals that held. He stopped. "I run organizations where my authority is not a subject. It is not a question anyone in the room holds open. There is my judgment, and there is compliance with my judgment, and that is the complete structure, a beat. And then I'd come into a negotiation, or a board context, or a conversation with a client who mattered, and there you were, performing better than me in the domain that I had always told myself was mine. The legitimate world, the respectable public face, and everyone in the room could see it. So you decided to manage it," she said. "I told myself I was structuring the future." He said it with no defense in it, which was the most honest she had heard him be in years. That after the marriage, the arrangement would normalize. That there was a version of it where he shook his head. "I know what I actually did." "Tell me," she said. "Say it." He looked at her directly. "I was going to use the legal structure of our marriage to reduce your professional standing without your knowledge. Because you weren't failing." He said the last sentence like it cost him. "Because you were succeeding, and I couldn't stand what your success said about me standing next to it." The kitchen was very quiet. "I never competed with you," she said. "Not once. Everything I built inside those companies, I built because it needed building, and I knew how. I wasn't keeping score. I wasn't trying to outperform you. I was just doing the work." She watched his face. "You turned my competence into an argument against me inside your own head. And then you found a 24-year-old who needed your approval, and you gave her access to everything I'd built, and you called it mentorship." She paused. "While I was paying 63% of the mortgage." He said nothing. "The messages," she said. "The ones you sent Elodie. You called me exhausting. You said I was too independent for what you actually needed." His jaw moved. He hadn't known she'd read those. She watched him absorb it. You told her you needed someone who makes you feel like the smartest person in the room, she said. You wrote that 9 weeks before you hired her, before the position even existed. She looked at him steadily. You didn't build a structure around protecting the company. You built a structure around protecting your ego from me. He put both hands flat on the counter. I know, he said. 2 words. Not managed, not positioned. The specific flatness of a man who has been alone with the truth of himself for a long night and has run out of the architecture required to build a better version of it. She picked up her portfolio. We should go, she said. We don't want to be late. The Midtown Law Office occupied 4 floors of a building that communicated institutional neutrality, the way certain rooms are designed to pale walls, recessed lighting, conference tables selected for the quality of implying objectivity. Reeves met her in the lobby and walked her to a smaller room separate from the main proceedings. And in person he was younger than his voice, early 40s, with the alert and economical manner of someone who had been listening carefully for a living, for a very long time. He walked her through the documentation the audit committee had received. Her materials, the credential logs, the administrative token records, the metadata reports on the contributor field edits, the wire transfer records, the strategic contribution timeline her attorney had compiled. Elodie's submissions, the private message archive, the formal statement, the fraudulent contributor attributions flagged in her personnel file. Kwan's meeting notes submitted that morning. He submitted them voluntarily, Zariah said. He said he'd been considering it for 3 weeks. Reeves looked at her for a moment. He said he should have done it sooner. She absorbed that without comment. Today's interviews establish formal record, Reeves said. The committee has the facts. What they need is testimony. Your testimony establishes the rights holder record on the affected documents and the financial contributions. Tell the truth in sequence. You'll be fine, I know, she said. He almost smiled. I know you know. The interview room had 6 people in it, 3 audit committee members, Reeves, a court reporter, and Zariah. She sat across the long table and answered everything they asked. She was precise and sequential and specific in the way she was specific in all professional contexts. Date, document name, transaction record, conversation summary, access log timestamp. She did not editorialize. She did not let anything that was real and raw about the experience get into the room in a way that would cloud the record. She just told them what had happened in the order it happened, with the documentation sourced to each point. 2 hours and 19 minutes. When it concluded, a sound splitting, the committee member at the center of the oval, a woman in her mid-60s who carried herself with the specific authority of someone who had formalized a great many difficult truths in rooms like this one, looked at Zariah and said, "The record is clear. Thank you for your precision." Zariah thanked her and left. In the hallway, she stood with her portfolio under her arm and breathed in a way she had not been able to breathe inside the room. Not relief, something more structural, the sensation of a mechanism that has completed a complex operation and confirmed that every part held. Reeves found her 20 minutes later. Jaehwan's interview is still in progress, he said. Kwan's notes corroborate your submissions in full. The fraudulent contributor attributions are being flagged as a matter of corporate record and will be corrected in the permanent documentation. He paused. Elodie Marr's position is being reviewed for immediate action based on the unauthorized access findings. The remediation figure for your financial contributions to the legitimate business operations. Another pause, slightly longer. Your attorney will receive the formal recommendation by end of day. I can tell you it's consistent with everything you submitted, and then some. She looked at him, and his authority over the legitimate corporate operations. Suspended pending the conclusion of the review. The board will determine the final structure. But the committee's findings support independent oversight at the executive level. That's their recommendation. She nodded. Reeves hesitated. Ms. Bellrose. For what it's worth, the documentary record you built was exceptional. The way it was organized, sequenced, sourced, it made the committee's work significantly easier. He looked at her directly. Most people in your situation don't have that. And the ones who do, usually can't present it without the emotion getting into the structure. Yours was clean all the way through. The emotion was in the room, she said. I just made sure it didn't get into the filing system. He nodded at that with something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. She walked to the elevator. She heard her name from down the hall before she reached it. Jahuan was coming out of the interview room. His attorney was beside him, a senior partner, she recognized, carrying the expression of a lawyer who has just sat for 2 hours in something unavoidable. Jahuan looked different than he had in the kitchen that morning. The compression was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, the way a structure shifts after something load-bearing has been removed. He was still standing. He was standing with everything he had. But the particular quality of authority that usually preceded him into rooms, the ambient pressure of it was gone. His attorney's hand went to his arm. He kept walking. She let the elevator go. He stopped 3 feet from her. His attorney stayed back with the professional discomfort of a man who cannot intervene and must witness. They're restructuring the board layer, Jahuan said. Independent oversight between my interests and the management structure. I know, the public companies, the maritime firm, the logistics consultancy. The restructuring is going to make the operational relationship between them and the other work. He stopped. He meant the underworld operations, the organizations that didn't have audit committees. It's going to be complicated. You built the complication, she said. I didn't design the structure. I know. He was not arguing. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying he looked at her with the stripped-down expression of a man who has used up all his available management of himself. What you've done here is permanent. You understand that. The legitimate side of everything I built, the legitimate side of everything you built was being held up significantly by my work, she said. The record now reflects that. That's not destruction. That's accuracy. He was quiet. I want to ask you something, he said. She waited. Did you know, he said, before Boston? Before the train. Did some part of you already know what it was? She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. She thought about 5 years of mornings at 4:47. The text she had not sent about the tickets she had booked. The first response she always swallowed and reached past for the diplomatic one. The thing she had not added up on purpose because the total felt like an indictment of her own judgment. I think I knew the shape of it, she said. I didn't know the details. The documents, the plan, Elodie. I didn't know the specifics. She paused. But I knew I had been adjusting for a long time. I kept telling myself it was flexibility. Partnership, she met his eyes. I didn't want to add it up. He absorbed that. I could make the financial restitution right now, he said. The full amount. The residence contribution. The loans to my mother. The business remediation. Today, without the process. My attorney is already in contact with yours, she said. Let the process run. Zariah Jahuan. She said his name the way he had always said hers quietly, but with something in it that closed the door. What I needed from you was not your money. It was never your money. What I needed was for you to see me as the person I actually was, not the asset you wanted me to be. She looked at him. You couldn't give me that. So now the process gives me back the money, and that's what's available, and it'll have to be enough. He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were doing something she had not seen them do in a very long time. Maybe ever. The man who feared nothing and controlled everything was standing in a midtown law office hallway looking at the woman he had systematically tried to reduce. And he was looking at her the way you look at something you have irreversibly broken and have only just understood the full value of. I stayed on the train, he said. His voice had come down to almost nothing. She knew what he meant. Penn Station, the morning. When you got off, he said. I stayed. I told myself you were making a point. I told myself you'd be on the next train and we'd talk in Boston, and you'd come around the way you always. He stopped. His jaw worked. I should have gotten off that train. She looked at him across the 3 feet of hallway between them. Yes, she said. You should have. She pressed the elevator button. If I had, he said. If I had gotten off. Would it have changed anything? The elevator arrived. She stepped in and turned to face him, her hand not on the door, not holding it open, just standing in the available space. I don't know, she said. I think it would have changed what came next. I don't know if it would have changed what was already true. She held his gaze. You stayed on that train because you were certain I would come back. Because I had always come back. She paused. That certainty was the problem. Not the train. The doors closed between them. She rode down alone and walked out onto Midtown's midday sidewalk into air that was cold and sharp and smelled like exhaust and a pretzel cart and the mineral smell of November in New York. She called Marcus. It's done, she said when he answered. A beat. How are you? She thought about it honestly. Hungry. I haven't actually eaten since 7. He laughed, and it was the right sound for the moment. Go eat something real, I will, Marcus, thank you. For all of it. The files, the metadata, everything. Zariah. His voice shifted slightly. It wasn't hard. You just had to ask. She thought about how long she had done things without asking. I know, she said. I'll remember that. She found a diner 2 blocks from the law office, the Genuine article, laminated menus and a counter with spinning stools and a server who moved with the efficient tiredness of someone 10 hours into a 12-hour shift and who called everyone Han without looking up to see if they deserved it. Zariah sat at the counter and ordered eggs and toast and orange juice and ate all of it, slowly, which she had not done at a meal in 5 days. She sat for a while after the plate was empty. The diner operated around her without requiring anything from her. A man at the end of the counter read a newspaper in sections, moving through it methodically. A couple in a booth near the window talked in the low, continuous way of people who have been together long enough that the conversation is not about information exchange. The cook worked his line with the focused economy of someone for whom this particular competence was simply Tuesday. Ordinary life, continuing in its ordinary way. She thought about what came next. Not in the procedural sense, she knew exactly what came next, procedurally. Her attorney would receive the remediation figure and initiate the negotiation. This would take several weeks, and would be the least pleasant part, because Hyrin would insert herself into the real estate conversation and would need to be managed firmly and without sentiment, which Zariah was now positioned to do. The corporate record corrections would move through the compliance office over the following weeks. Elodie's separation would be processed. The board restructuring would take longer. These things always did, but the direction was established. The procedural future was mapped. What she was thinking about was the other kind of next. The kind that wasn't in any document. The kind that wasn't in any document started building the independent structure she had been drafting in the Boston hotel room at midnight. The Boston partnership was moving toward formalization. 2 partners. Both professional peers, both people who had watched her close the acquisition and reached out specifically because of how she had closed it, and the conversation had been the kind of conversation she had almost forgotten was possible. 2 people talking about work as equals, both bringing something, neither one managing the other's ego alongside the actual subject matter. She had also, in the last 2 weeks, made 3 calls she had been putting off for years. A former client she had quietly distanced herself from because Jay Juan had found the relationship inconvenient, and she had, without acknowledging it as such, accommodated that. A professional contact in the Boston maritime sector who had reached out about a potential collaboration that Zariah had declined twice without fully examining why. A sound-like invitation she had turned down for 3 consecutive years, because the timing had always conflicted with something in Jae-won's calendar, something that had needed her present. She had accepted all 3. They were small adjustments. The kind that looked minor from the outside and were not minor from the inside, because they represented the beginning of a calendar that was organized around her priorities without a secondary layer of filtering. She left a 20 on the counter and walked out. The afternoon had settled into the particular gray-gold quality of New York in November, the light coming in at an angle that made ordinary buildings look more interesting than they were. She walked without a specific destination, which was something she rarely did and which felt, today, precisely right. She was halfway down the block when she heard someone call her name. She turned. Hyrin. The older woman was standing beside a car, which meant she had come deliberately, had known where Zariah was, which meant Jae-hwan had told her. Hyrin was dressed the way she was always dressed, with the precise, controlled elegance of a woman who understood appearance as a form of authority. Her face was composed, but underneath the composition, Zariah could see something that she had not seen on Hyrin's face in 5 years. Not quite uncertainty, something adjacent to it. The expression of a woman who is prepared for a confrontation and arrived to find the landscape has already changed. Zariah stopped walking. Hyrin came to her rather than expecting her to approach, which was itself a departure from the established pattern. "I would like to speak with you," Hyrin said. "All right," Zariah said. She did not move toward the car. She stood on the sidewalk and waited. Hyrin looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "You were like a daughter to me." "You said that when I called you about the loans," Zariah said. "Right before you hung up." Something flickered across Hyrin's face. "What my son did," she stopped. "The documents, the intern. The plan he made without consulting me." The word consulting landed with specific weight, which told Zariah something about the dynamic between them that she had never fully understood before. Hyrin had not known, or she had not known the extent of it. "He was foolish. He was afraid," Zariah said. "Afraid of me, specifically." Which is its own kind of foolish. Hyrin's chin lifted slightly. "I want to handle the money privately, without the civil process." "Then have your financial manager call my attorney this week," Zariah said. "I'm not interested in dragging it out. I want it resolved, not punished." A pause. "All of it." "All 47,000, Zariah said. "Yes." Hyrin looked at her with an expression that was complicated, in a way Zariah did not entirely have language for. It was not hostility. It was not softness. Sipst. It was something like the recognition one formidable woman gives another when the circumstances require it, stripped of all the layers the relationship had accumulated over 5 years, the daughter-in-law framing, the careful family role, the performance of harmony. "I always thought," Hyrin said, "that you were too much." "For him. I told him that, in the beginning." Zariah blinked. "You told him I was too much. I told him he would have to work very hard to be the man you needed." Hyrin's voice was even. "He told me he knew that. He believed it for a while." She looked down the street and back. "He stopped believing it. That is his failure, not yours." It was the most honest thing had ever said to her, and it arrived too late, and still mattered in some ways Zariah wasn't ready to examine directly. "I'll tell my attorney to expect the call," Zariah said. Hyrin nodded once. She moved toward the car door and then stopped. Without turning fully, "The Boston deal, I heard it closed well." "It closed the way I planned it," Zariah said. A pause that might have been the beginning of something else. Then Hyrin got in the car, and it pulled away into the traffic and was gone. Zariah stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she walked to the subway and went home. The apartment was the Manhattan residence, still for another few weeks, until the property process completed. She had already found a place in Brooklyn, had found it quietly, 2 days after Boston, had walked through it alone on Tuesday afternoon, and had made the decision in approximately 90 seconds, the way she made most decisions that were right. It was smaller. It had afternoon light in the kitchen and a desk by the window that looked at the street, and she had already moved the things that mattered, the files and the books, and her mother's pour-over coffee maker, and the larger pieces would follow when the property settlement was finalized. She sat at the desk in the Manhattan apartment and wrote a long email to her attorney, documenting the sidewalk conversation with Hyrin, because she documented everything, because her mother had taught her that the paper trail was the only thing that stood permanently between intention and outcome. Then she opened a separate document and worked on the Boston partnership structure for 2 hours. It was good work. The kind of work that absorbed completely, that required all of her and returned all of her, that left her feeling at the end of it like someone who had used their specific capabilities on something that deserved them. She had not felt that cleanly and longer than she wanted to calculate. At 9:15, she closed the laptop. She called her mother. She had not told her mother the full shape of it until the second week, when there was enough procedural structure in place that telling it felt like reporting rather than drowning. Her mother had listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always been exceptional at. "Are you all right?" her mother asked now. "I'm better than all right," Zariah said. I'm tired, but it's the right kind of tired. There is a right kind. The kind where you know what you spent it on. She paused. I keep thinking about what you said. About being right versus being effective. I said that when you were 22 and didn't get the promotion you'd earned. I think I've been applying it wrong, Zariah said. I thought being effective meant adjusting, managing. I thought it meant making room for other people to be comfortable. She looked at the window. But I was adjusting in one direction only, the whole time. You were loyal, her mother said. Loyalty is not wrong. It just has to be aimed somewhere that aims back. It didn't aim back. No, her mother said, without softness or cruelty. It didn't. They talked for an hour. About small things eventually, after the large ones had been said her mother's practice, a case that was frustrating her, the street outside her Baltimore house that had been under construction for 3 months and showed no signs of concluding. Zariah sat in the Manhattan apartment in the dark with the city outside and felt the specific relief of being known by someone who had known her before she became the person she was professionally, who had watched her build that person, who had opinions about the building that were not filtered through any agenda. She went to bed at 11. She slept 7 hours, which was the most she had slept in 2 weeks. The Boston Partnership Agreement was signed on a Tuesday morning in early December, in a conference room that was smaller and less impressive than any room she had been sitting in for the previous month, which she found she actively preferred. 2 partners, equal stake, equal authority. Her name on the letterhead in the order it belonged. She signed it and sat for a moment after the room began to clear, looking at the document. Her name, her work, her terms. She put it in her portfolio and went to a late lunch with her new partners, 2 people who talked about the work the way she talked about it, with genuine engagement, with the particular pleasure of people who find the thing they're good at genuinely interesting, rather than merely remunerative. And she sat across from them and participated in a professional conversation as an equal party for the first time in longer than she'd let herself notice. 3 weeks passed. The property settlement completed in the 3rd week. The number was larger than the original contribution had been, because Manhattan and because the market had been unkind to no one over the intervening years. Her attorney called to read it to her, and she wrote it down in her notebook and looked at the number for a moment, and then turned the page. Hirin's financial manager had called her attorney the day after the sidewalk conversation. The $47,000 settled in 10 days, transferred in full, with a terseness that communicated both pragmatism and displeasure, which was an accurate representation of the situation. Elliott's separation from the SEO corporate structure was formalized at the end of the 2nd week. Clean, no public statement. Zariah heard from Marcus that she had taken a position in Philadelphia at a smaller firm, which was probably the right scale for someone starting over with a cleaner understanding of what she was actually being hired for. Zariah had no further feeling about Elodie that she could clearly name. Something in the general direction of, she was used, and she used the situation, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and whatever she does with what she learned is hers to determine. The corporate record corrections moved through the compliance office. Every document with Zariah's name absent from the contributor field and Elodie's name fraudulently added was corrected in the permanent record. The maritime data pitch framework that had been in her personnel file was removed and re-attributed. A sound-like and procedural, the corrections were dry and confirmation email in the Brooklyn apartment on a Thursday morning, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, something quieter. The sensation of being accurately represented in the official record of the things you had done, which should not have felt like anything particular, because it should have been the baseline condition. Because credit for the work you did should be the minimum, not a resolution to a legal process. A sound like green wood splitting, but she felt it anyway, the small specific weight of it, because the body keeps its own accounting, separate from the mind's arguments about what ought to be necessary. She was in Boston the 2nd Friday of December for a working meeting with the Phase 2 team, and afterward the seller's lead representative, the man who had watched her manage the conference room disaster, who had shaken her hand first when the deal closed, stopped her on her way out of the building. "I heard the partnership announcement," he said. "Thank you." He paused in the way of someone deciding to say something they hadn't planned. I've been in this business a long time. I've sat across from a lot of capable people. He met her eyes. I've never watched someone handle what you handled in that conference room. The document disaster, the near collapse without the damage getting into the room. With everyone else I've seen hit that way, it gets in. You see it in how they hold their shoulders, or how they're suddenly 3 seconds behind on responses. He paused. With you, I couldn't see it. It was in the room, she said. I just cleaned it up before you could see where it had been. He laughed. That's the skill, he said. She flew back to New York that evening. She was in the Brooklyn apartment by 9, and she poured a glass of water. She actually drank and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below. A couple walking a dog, a man locking his bicycle to a signpost, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has lost a bicycle before. A woman in a heavy coat carrying 2 grocery bags who looked at the door of her building, like she was very glad to be almost home. Ordinary life doing its ordinary thing. She had a dinner with Claire on Friday that she was genuinely looking forward to, which felt notable. She had not been genuinely looking forward to anything social in a long time. She had been going through the motions of a social existence, while most of her was somewhere else in the documents, in the management, in the constant low-grade calculation of how to maintain the balance of a life that had too many competing demands on her primary energy. The competing demand was gone now. What remained was hers. She went to bed at 10 and slept. On a Saturday morning in mid-December, with no professional obligation requiring it, Zariah went back to Penn Station. She took the subway. She had her coat and a bag with a book she wasn't sure she'd read, and her coffee from the Brooklyn apartment carried in a thermos, because the Penn Station coffee was not good and she had stopped doing things just because they were available and familiar. She came up from the subway into the main hall and stood in the movement of it for a moment. The place had its usual density, people with bags and purpose, the particular human music of a transit hub, arrivals and departures happening simultaneously on all sides. The big clock that Penn Station had always had looked down at the proceedings with the serene indifference of something that measures time without caring about any particular instance of it. She found a bench, not the one from before, a different one, at a different angle, one that gave her a clean sightline to the departure boards. She sat down and opened the thermos and drank her coffee and watched the boards cycle through their changes. She thought about the morning 5 weeks ago, the train she had not been on, the moment she had stood on the platform in the cold morning with her rolling bag and sent 2 words to a man who had already decided the story. She thought about what she had believed in that moment she was throwing away. 5 years, the investment of them, the apartment, the plan, the future she had been building alongside someone who had, it turned out, been quietly redesigning it without her. She understood now, with the clarity that only distance provides, that she had not thrown away 5 years. You did not throw away the years that built you. You did not throw away the capability you had developed, the knowledge you had earned, the professional reputation you had constructed document by document and negotiation by negotiation, and early morning by early morning. Those years lived in her permanently, structural, to the person she was in every room she walked into. What she had walked away from was the arrangement that was slowly consuming the person those years had built. And she had walked away from it at the last possible moment when she still had enough of herself left intact to know she was doing it. She finished the coffee and watched 2 departure boards cycle through and thought about love. Not in the wounded way, not in the way that examines ruins. In the way she examined most things that mattered, with genuine curiosity, with the willingness to look at the real shape of something rather than the version she preferred. She still believed in it. That was the thing she had found surprising about herself, somewhere in the 3rd week, when the anger had burned down enough that she could see what was underneath it. She had expected to find devastation, bitterness calcified into something permanent, the specific cynicism of someone who has given significantly and been given a kind of contempt in return. She had not found that. What she found was something more like the clarity that arrives after a long fever, the sensation of being able to see accurately again after a prolonged period of seeing through the distortion of someone else's needs. She still believed love was real. She still believed it was possible. She had seen it in her parents' kitchen when she was a child, in the couple in the diner booth who talked in the low, continuous way of people for whom the other person is home, in the small, unremarkable evidence of it that persisted everywhere in ordinary life, if you were looking with clear eyes. What she did not believe anymore, what had been burned out of her with a precision she was beginning to appreciate, was that love was compatible with diminishment. That genuine care could coexist with the systematic reduction of another person's authority over their own life. That someone could love you and simultaneously construct a legal mechanism to make you smaller without your knowledge. Those two things could not occupy the same space. She understood that now with the certainty of someone who had tested the premise and received a definitive result. The love, to the extent it had been real, had existed alongside the diminishment. Both were true, and the love had not been sufficient to address the diminishment, which meant the love, whatever it was, had not been the kind that could hold the weight she had been resting on it. She needed someone who moved to make room, not someone who expected her to find the smaller space and call it comfort. She was 33 years old. She had her work and her name on her own documents, and her mother's coffee maker in a Brooklyn kitchen and a partnership agreement with her name in the right position on the letterhead. She had time. She was not in a hurry, and she was not desperate, and she was not afraid. She was, for the first time in 5 years, operating from her actual position rather than a managed version of it. The departure board updated above her. A train to Boston was listed at gate 12, departing in 22 minutes. A woman sat down on the far end of the bench 50s, traveling alone, a rolling bag beside her, and a settled composure that came from having spent many hours in transit and having made a workable philosophy of waiting. She opened a book without looking at anything around her. The ease of someone completely sufficient to themselves. Zariah looked at the board. 22 minutes. She stood up. She adjusted the strap of her bag. She dropped the empty thermos into her bag and looked at the departure board one more time. And then she walked through the main hall toward the gates. She was not taking the Boston train today. She was going home to Brooklyn, to the desk by the window, and the afternoon light in the kitchen and the work she had waiting for her. Good work that required her fully and returned her fully. But she walked past the gate anyway, just to walk past it. Just to see the train sitting there on the platform. Ordinary, functional, going where it was going, indifferent to the specific human drama that had occurred in its first-class car 5 weeks ago. She looked at it through the gate. Then she turned and walked back through the main hall and out into the December afternoon, into the cold city air, into the ordinary Saturday momentum of a life that was, for the first time in a long time, organized entirely around the person she had actually chosen to be. She put her hands in her coat pockets and walked. Manhattan moved around her in its relentless way, the crowds and the noise and the buildings and the particular quality of a city that asks nothing of you and offers everything and cares about neither. She had always loved it for exactly that quality. Its complete indifference was paradoxically the most freeing thing about it. She thought about Monday, the Phase 2 kickoff call, the anchor client she had talked to yesterday, who had said unprompted, without her working toward it, just said it directly over the phone, "I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for the version of this project that has your name on it." She had thanked him and moved the conversation forward professionally. And later, alone, she had sat with that sentence for a while. Someone had noticed. Someone had noticed and had waited and had told her directly. That was a different world from the one she had been living in. She walked the length of 2 blocks without thinking about anything specific, just walking, just being in the city on a December Saturday, just being the person she was without managing or adjusting or calculating the shape she occupied in relation to someone else's requirements. Her phone buzzed. "Claire confirming Friday dinner." She replied, "I'll be there, somewhere with food. My choice." Claire replied with an emoji that conveyed both approval and mild alarm at the confidence of this, which made Zariah smile. She put the phone back in her pocket. She walked another block and turned toward the subway and thought, once, about Jae-Hwan not with longing and not with anger, just the clean, flat thought of someone thinking about a significant chapter that has concluded. She thought about the man she had met in Chicago, who had listened the way people rarely listened. She thought about the man who had sat in his office 6 weeks before the wedding and described their marriage as a mechanism for normalizing the power balance. She thought about the fact that both of those men were real and were the same man, and that this was simply the truth of people, that they contained their contradictions completely, and that her job was not to resolve his contradictions for him. She had spent 5 years trying to resolve his contradictions for him. She was done with that project. He would either figure out what had broken in him that made competence feel like threat, or he wouldn't. That was his work to do. She had her own. The subway entrance appeared ahead of her. She took the stairs down and swiped through and stood on the platform in the underground warmth and waited for the train with her hands in her pockets. The train came. She got on. She found a seat by the window and looked at her own reflection in the dark glass as the train moved through the tunnel, and she saw a woman who was tired in the right way and clear-eyed in a way she had not been in years and completely unambiguously present in her own life. The tunnel opened above ground briefly, and the December light came through the windows, and she looked out at the city going past. She had not lost 5 years. She had spent 5 years becoming someone specific, and she had taken that person with her when she walked off the train, and she was still that person. And the next 5 years were entirely available to her, and she intended to use them precisely as she chose. The train moved through Brooklyn toward her stop. Outside, the city continued, and Zariah Bellrose sat in the window-seater seat, the one she had paid for, the one she had chosen, the one that had been waiting for her all along, and she rode it all the way home.